So, I finally got to see the Dog Man movie a whole week later over at the UK. For some reason, they just do it like that. And that movie was just absolutely chaotic, wasn't it? Now, when I first saw the trailer for DreamWorks' Dog Man, I was really pleasantly surprised. As judging by just the art style alone, it just seemed to be a massively eclectic, stylistic movie. And to be honest, that's pretty much exactly what we got. This movie is unapologetic in its just rapid pacing. Now, clearly with it being an adaptation from a kid's book, it's going to have all sorts of benefits on its side when it comes to story, and they just had to work on expressing themselves to tell the story that's already been written. And I had no idea about the original books. I'd not really read anything. I had no idea what I was in for, but I would be lying if I said I didn't enjoy this movie. It's not exactly a 10 out of 10. There are certainly flaws to it, but I think really at the end of the day, it was just a very different movie. It was trying to be very much its own thing, and it does that very, very well. As I'm sure you're at least slightly aware, the whole concept is the idea that a human cop and a dog cop have a horrendous incident that's thankfully not too traumatizing for children, and they sew the dog's head onto the body of the man. We don't really address that any further because, to be honest, the man dies. Like, he just becomes the dog. The idea is meant to be the man knows kung fu, but he's very stupid. Combine that with the dog's intelligence, and you've got a full-set super cop, but is the other half somewhere else? Have they explored that in the movies? Is there a dog body walking around with the man's head on it? Because that man is dead. And clearly, you're not really supposed to think about this movie too hard. Just enjoy it for the fun, kooky cartoon that it is, because, like, the only other real plotline attached to the actual Dog Man before they became Dog Man was the fact that they did have a girlfriend that's now just run away and does not appear in the movie. I assume they're prevalent in the book. If they're not, God, that's just horrible and cruel. Instead, what this movie is really about is the trials and tribulations of Dog Man and their biggest rival, Petey the cat. But the thing is, as well, is it's not just, I was expecting a plotline of, Petey the cat, big evil cat's gonna get some big world-dominating plotline, and then they'll beat him at the end of the day. That was the plotline I expected. Little did I know, 20 minutes into this movie, it turns into a montage of that whole plot happening 4 times in a row. It's very much, hey, the dog immediately jailed the cat. Then he got out, and then he did it again. Then he got out, and then he did it again. And then he got out, and he did it again. It was not a very simplistic plotline in that degree. It very much felt like this was an entire Saturday morning cartoon unraveling to show us, oh, here's the routine, here's the premise of what happens every week. Now the plotline begins with something bigger? So already from a plot perspective, very, very different. And the tone is not quite what you'd expect because of that. But before we go into further details of the plotline, the soundtrack is absolutely stellar. I love that brassy kind of sound font, and it's on show in a good section of places here. Plus, they got a handful of montages for Dog Man just doing his thing every now and again. It's just, it's really, really high quality, which is something I didn't necessarily expect from DreamWorks. As I've been rambling on about in the business side of things, DreamWorks has now decided to cull their in-house animators, or at least a good chunk of them, and is working more with third-party animation studios to make their movies. It cuts cost and it cuts jobs, but judging from the final output, this movie is pretty solidly alright. I wouldn't say it's better than the likes of The Wild Robot. It's not exactly a masterful masterpiece, but for what it is, as a fun, quirky cartoon, yeah, it covers everything it really needs to. Now, while this movie is meant to be all about Dog Man, I feel like the second half of this movie wasn't that Dog Man specific. Specifically, I feel like Petey the cat kind of became the main character for most of this movie. I wouldn't be surprised if he got more screen time than Dog Man. To be fair, he's voiced by Pete Davidson, so maybe that, the dog's just voiced by someone going a woo every now and again. So, I don't know. Either way, what the real plotline rolls out to being is the cat gets a clone of themselves, which ends up being a child, and then they come to have internal conflicts of actually being the good guy, maybe not being so bad. Their clone's certainly happy. The clone makes friends with Dog Man. They go back and forth over all of that. He meets his grandfather because his father is where his trauma comes from for why he's evil in the first place. And then he revives an evil fish who ends up being the real big bad to the whole thing. It's a little bit confused, this movie, in places. I feel like earlier in the movie, it felt very unfocused. Once we had that cartoon montage of, hey, here he is going to jail back and forth, I kind of didn't know what the big story was. It just kind of did a few antics. It came together in the final act in that suddenly there's a real big bad and our cat villain evil guy is slowly turning to be anti-hero-y. I get it, it's fine. And to be honest, I didn't think the fish was too out of place. I don't think they were an unneeded extension at the end of the story, because we didn't get that story that I thought would have been the real ending. There wasn't an add-on to an ending, there was no ending yet. The fish is the ending, and they certainly established the fish throughout the entire movie. I thought they were relatively fitting. Naturally, they came with a British accent. It was actually Ricky Gervais, which is, puts a bit of a downer on the note, but hey, that's another problem for another day. One of the real things I find a lot of recent animated movies really don't do, and not all of them have to, but it's the thing that to me makes a 10 out of 10 movie, is any good moments of real heart and emotional, expression. Wild Robot had that in droves in all sorts of places. This movie has some occasional moments I feel like you could extract an emotional moment. Kind of like how people take Simpsons shots and then turn them into vaporwave montages. There's a couple moments there, like one of the characters sitting on a hill overlooking the city and having a moment to themselves. It's not very strong in this movie, and I think that's because that's not quite fitting to the tone. In fact, actually, I'd go on to say one of the worst scenes in this movie is meant to be an emotionally strong moment. There's a moment where Dog Man is just lying down on the floor, I guess fatigued about the whole thing, with a journalist talking alongside them who also lies down and says, yeah, things can get pretty tough, but you gotta pick yourself back up again. That's basically the entire scene, is saying that one line, and the whole time there's a cameraman behind them watching who unfittingly starts breaking down into tears over the lines, as if they were meant to be more impactful lines, but they weren't. Like, the guy's actually lying down in the fetal position sucking his thumb at the end, as if we had some profound emotional moment other than, it's sad, but we should get up anyway. That's where I think they actively tried to do something and didn't do it justice. Everything else, they just didn't try. They were doing something else, and they did those very, very well. Does that make sense? But where this movie really shines is in the jokes and the gags, and boy, oh boy, are they a lot per minute. This whole movie is just so fast-paced. I mean, a handful of jokes I missed because I didn't know I was meant to be looking out for some. Occasionally, there's like little references on license plates or newspaper articles that flew by so fast you couldn't read them and you only get one chance. I could certainly see parents getting lost behind it. Maybe the kids can keep up. I guess they gotta watch it several times to catch it all. Is that the marketing attempt? Either way, I kind of like it. It's so high-paced, so TikTok-brained, and really keeps your attention that it's not forceful in a way that it's like schmuck. It's good writing. There's good gags. It's just a lot per second. As I said in the title, it's unapologetically chaotic. Hey there, thank you for making it to the halfway mark of this video. Come along and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll be keeping up with any animated movies to hopefully review pretty much all of them throughout the year, so come join if you're up for it. Otherwise, let's get back to the second half of DreamWorks' Dog Man. One of the recurring gags that's certainly easy to catch, it's not as fast-paced, is I love the gag of all these buildings having different giant, props for their marketing that then get used in a giant mecha building fight later. There's one with a giant pair of boots that, of course, one just steps in and starts walking along with. It's sort of a classic, but it's nice to see it actually done as a recurring gag that then comes together to build something later. I don't know, I liked it a lot. There were some shots as well that were way crazy speedy. Like I couldn't really tell you what's going on, or you won't remember it, but there's a shot of the baby cat, Lil PT, opening a door, and I swear it's 6 frames long, if that. It's just, it's in the middle of a big moment. I can't remember what it is. I think maybe it might be the moment that the grandpa cat appears. It's a shot of the robot, shot of adult cat being what's going on? And then 6 frames of the little cat pushing open the door to reveal that. Very, very fast paced. And also, of course, I kind of almost take it for granted now. It's happened so very often. The stylistic choice of showcasing title cards and then scratching them. We see it in the trailer as well, and the footage is shuffled in the background here. That's just very nice. There's all sorts of details there, little transitional smear frames. It just brilliantly all comes together in a way that's simplistic and kind of works with the original art style that the book's based off of, so it makes a lot of sense there. It's certainly a lot better than making something so generic and simple. Maybe it's a cheat code that it's DreamWorks doing an adaptation, so they don't have to be generic in that way, but hey, I'm still very much in the honeymoon phase when it comes to this particular art style, this trend. And while I said earlier that it feels like the cat gets more screen time than the dog, all sorts of characters early in the movie are sort of pretty quickly forgotten by the end as we get to late stage stuff. The chief of police, I feel like, is missing for the middle half of the movie and then appears kind of near the end. The villain has a sidekick teenager type girl who's there, then leaves. That's part of their thing. They quit. And then they come back for one moment to say, hey, I just wanted to annoy you with this thing. And I think that's the last time we really see her. I feel like there could have been some nice payoff at the end somehow with her. It felt a little bit like she was clearly a character from the books, that they just didn't want to expand their side of the story in this 2-hour movie. Makes sense. It's only a 2-hour movie. If that. No, it's 90 minutes. It's 89 minutes. It's short. God, really? It felt like we covered a lot in 89 minutes. It's very efficient in that way. Certainly on the cat side of the plot line, I felt like there was lots of chunky time put into setup, which was really, really good. I quite liked the slow development into this anti-hero inner conflict element of this villain. I think that was all done absolutely fine. And probably was the highlight of the movie, because it's kind of the main point of the movie. Because yeah, on the other side of things, I wasn't crazy on much of the Dog Man stuff. Like, there's a sequence where he's singing sadly to himself, but it's just a bunch of woofing, but it's not very good barking, you know? It's just like, I don't exactly want to say it sounds too human, but I wasn't very sold by any of the sounds that Dog Man made. Doesn't help that I saw the very first showing I could, and there was 2 other people in the cinema screening. Okay, 2 other families, but like, there's like 5 people max, and me. There wasn't a lot of laughter. I can tell it's played for laughs. Maybe it does better in another screening, but it didn't for me, and it didn't in my cinema, so. I liked the occasional nod you can catch in the background, a sort of recurring gag mentioning how people drop out of college and become comic artists instead. Obviously a nod to the author. It's also what Lil Petey's aspirations are, apparently. And if I was to make any other real criticisms about the plotline beyond that one, like, emotional scene in the middle that didn't do very well, the mecha fight. Like, all the buildings come alive near the end. That's kind of like part of the Fish's big plan. That felt like it was meant to be the big final boss, and it was, but it was also kind of sped run through. Like, the moment they start moving, we get a mecha robot and then immediately decimate them, and it felt a little bit underwhelming in that regard. And then it moves on anyway to the next level big boss of the actual fish confrontation. It was like, at most, that final act felt a little bit underwhelming for how fast it went. But it's a very fast movie in general. As I said, 89 minutes. It's got a quota to fill, and we got to move on, you know? I didn't hate some of the other building jokes in there. There's an indifference building that's indifferent, as well as a laser palace one that just has fun. Classic dancing at the end of a DreamWorks movie vibes. Even though there's actually no post-credit scene, and that's kind of disappointing, but maybe the trend's over there. Beyond that, though, I think this was a pretty stellar movie. It doesn't need to have the emotional weight to be a valid movie. It's very much trying to do its own thing. It's eclectically fast. It goes for that sort of Saturday morning cartoon vibes. You sort of already see it in that montage early on to just say, this is how the world works. Let's do a storyline after the classic villain appears, a villain defeated story, and it's quite nice. Really, it's just the small details you can come to appreciate. I love that one of the main invented robots is called ATHD, which doesn't quite work in my accent, but you get the idea. ADHD is just a great little pun. And overall, this movie just reeks of style. That was meant to be I don't know if reeks is a pejorative term there, but yeah, it's very stylistic. It very clearly just masters most of the things it wants to do. It's only a little bit off when it comes to Dog Man voice acting and getting any semblance of emotional beats and weight out there. The fish is defeated by saying he just needs a friend. And it works. Sure, kids movie, whatever. The fart jokes weren't the worst in the world. They had slightly more practicality to them. That's apparently my quota when it comes to the mandatory fart jokes in a kids movie. And though it's very easy to lose some of the details with how fast and chaotic the movie is, I don't hate it. It's not the worst thing in the world. And I remember as a kid anyway, there were all sorts of lines that I didn't fully process, and I still enjoyed the movie nonetheless. Just means you can rewatch it and catch better details a second time round. Dog Man is very much its own bubble of a movie, very unapologetic in the way it wants to present itself, but ultimately, it's pretty damn good. For being just this kooky, crazy cartoon of a movie, I would just say this is a fun romp throughout. Energetic, light-hearted, and only slightly traumatic if you think too deep beneath the surface. I'd like to see a little bit more emotion, but I say that with every animated movie I see. But hey, at the very least, this could very well be a franchise for DreamWorks, so I'm sure there's all sorts of source material to bounce off of. And if they do make a Dog Man 2, I'd very much support it. I had pretty high hopes when I saw the first trailer for Dog Man, and I gotta say, I'm pretty well satisfied after the fact. For now, though, I'll be ending things off there. That was my little review of DreamWorks' new Dog Man. I'm probably a week late anyway. Thank you, Britain, for being delayed for some reason. For now, though, my name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this review, and I shall see you in a little bit.